Chapter 13, Part 2 of Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel, by Guy de Maupassant. Translator unknown. Chapter 13. Madame de Marelle, Part 2. Duroy returned at 4 o'clock to await his mistress. She was somewhat late because her husband had come home for a week. She asked, "Can you come to dinner tomorrow? He will be delighted to see you." "No, I dine at the Walters. We have a great many political and financial matters to talk over." She took off her hat. He pointed to a bag on the mantelpiece. "I bought you some sweetmeats." She clapped her hands. "What a darling you are!" She took them, tasted one, and said, "They are delicious. I shall not leave one." "Come, sit down in the armchair. I will sit at your feet and eat my bonbons." He smiled as he saw her take the seat a short while since occupied by Madame Walter. She too called him darling, little one, dearest, and the words seemed to him sweet and caressing from her lips, while from Madame Walter's they irritated and nauseated him. Suddenly he remembered the 70,000 francs he was going to make, and bluntly interrupting Madame de Marelle's chatter, he said, "Listen, my darling, I am going to entrust you with a message to your husband. Tell him from me to buy tomorrow 10,000 francs worth of Moroccan stock, which is at 72, and I predict that before 3 months are past, he will have made 80,000 francs. Tell him to maintain absolute silence. Tell him that the expedition to Tangiers is decided upon, and that the French government will guarantee the Moroccan debt. It is a state secret I am confiding to you, remember." She listened to him gravely and murmured, "Thank you, I will tell my husband this evening. You may rely upon him. He will not speak of it. He can be depended upon. There is no danger." She had eaten all of her bonbons and began to toy with the buttons on his vest. Suddenly, she drew a long hair out of the buttonhole and began to laugh. "See, here is one of Madeleine's hairs. You are a faithful husband." Then, growing serious, she examined the scarcely perceptible thread more closely and said, "It is not Madeleine's, it is dark." He smiled. "It probably belongs to the housemaid." But she glanced at the vest with the care of a police inspector and found a second hair twisted around a second button. Then she saw a third, and turning pale and trembling somewhat, she exclaimed, "Oh, some woman has left hairs around all your buttons." In surprise, he stammered, "Why, you are mad." She continued to unwind the hairs and cast them upon the floor. With her woman's instinct, she had divined their meaning and gasped in her anger, ready to cry, "She loves you, and she wished you to carry away with you something of hers. Oh, you are a traitor!" She uttered a shrill, nervous cry.
Oh, it is an old woman's hair. Here is a white one. You have taken a fancy to an old woman now. Then you do not need me. Keep the other one." She rose. He attempted to detain her and stammered: "No, Clo, you are absurd. I do not know whose it is. Listen, stay, see, stay." But she repeated: "Keep your old woman. Keep her. Have a chain made of her hair, of her gray hair. There is enough for that." Hastily she donned her hat and veil, and when he attempted to touch her, she struck him in the face and made her escape while he was stunned by the blow. When he found that he was alone, he cursed Madame Walter, bathed his face, and went out vowing vengeance. That time he would not pardon. No, indeed. He strolled to the boulevard and stopped at a jeweler's to look at a chronometer which he had wanted for some time, and which would cost 1,800 francs. He thought with joy: if I make my 70,000 francs, I can pay for it. And he began to dream of all the things he would do when he got the money. First of all, he would become a deputy. Then he would buy the chronometer. Then he would speculate on change. And then. He did not enter the office, preferring to confer with Madeleine before seeing Walter again and writing his article. He turned toward home. He reached Rue Drouot when he paused. He had forgotten to inquire for Count de Vaudrec, who lived on Chaussee d'Antin. He retraced his steps with a light heart, thinking of 1,000 things, of the fortune he would make, of that rascal of a Laroche, and of old Walter. He was not at all uneasy as to Clotilde's anger, knowing that she would soon forgive him. When he asked the janitor of the house in which Count de Vaudrec lived, "How is Monsieur de Vaudrec? I have heard that he has been ailing of late," the man replied: "The Count is very ill, sir. They think he will not live through the night. The gout has reached his heart." Duroy was so startled that he did not know what to do. Vaudrec dying? He stammered: "Thanks, I will call again," unconscious of what he was saying. He jumped into a cab and drove home. His wife had returned. He entered her room out of breath. "Did you know? Vaudrec is dying." She was reading a letter and turning to him asked: "What did you say?" "I said that Vaudrec is dying of an attack of gout." Then he added: "What shall you do?" She rose. Her face was livid. She burst into tears and buried her face in her hands. She remained standing, shaken by sobs, torn by anguish. Suddenly she conquered her grief and, wiping her eyes, said: "I am going to him. Do not worry about me. I do not know what time I shall return. Do not expect me." He replied: "Very well, go." They shook hands and she left in such haste that she forgot her gloves. Georges, after dining alone, began to write his article. He wrote it according to the minister's instructions, hinting to the readers that the expedition to Morocco would not take place. He took it when completed to the office, conversed several moments with Monsieur Walter, and set out again, smoking with a light heart, he knew not why. His wife had not returned. He retired and fell asleep. Toward midnight, Madeleine came home. Georges sat up in bed and asked, "Well?" He had never seen her so pale and agitated. She whispered, "He is dead." "Ah, and he told you nothing?" "Nothing. He was unconscious when I arrived." Questions which he dared not ask arose to Georges's lips. "Lie down and rest," said he. She disrobed hastily and slipped into bed. He continued. Had he any relatives at his deathbed? "Only a nephew." "Ah, did he often see that nephew?" "They had not met for 10 years." "Had he other relatives?" "No, I believe not." "Will that nephew be his heir?" "I do not know." "Was Vaudrec very rich?" "Yes, very." "Do you know what he was worth?" "No, not exactly. 1 or 2 millions, perhaps." He said no more. She extinguished the light. He could not sleep. He looked upon Mme. Walter's promised 70,000 francs as very insignificant. Suddenly he thought he heard Madeleine crying. In order to insure himself, he asked, "Are you asleep?" "No." Her voice was tearful and unsteady. He continued, "I forgot to tell you that your minister has deceived us." "How?" He gave her a detailed account of the combination prepared by Laroche and Walter. When he concluded, she asked, "How did you know that?" He replied, "Pardon me if I do not tell you. You have your means of obtaining information into which I do not inquire. I have mine, which I desire to keep. I can vouch at any rate for the truth of my statements." She muttered, "It may be possible. I suspected that they were doing something without our knowledge." As she spoke, Georges drew near her. She paid no heed to his proximity, however, and turning toward the wall, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. End of chapter 13. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.